Hey guys, Mr. Happy here, and now with something uploaded for every piece of content except PvP, I'm still ranking that up. Should not have stopped for 2 weeks. I think it's time to cover my overall thoughts on Final Fantasy XIV A Realm Reborn's first major content patch, patch 2.1, A Realm Awoken. Now please keep in mind that what you'll hear in this video is my opinion and should be treated as such. While some factual information is present, my ideals and beliefs about the patch represent only my own thoughts. With that out of the way, let's begin. So 2.1 brought to us a ton of new content. It brought us new story developments, Good King Moggle XII, the Wandering Minstrel in his first ballad, which is Ultima Hard Mode. It brought us the Crystal Tower, it brought us Extreme Mode Primals, it brought us Treasure Hunts, it brought us Beastmen dailies, it brought us housing, sort of. PvP and an assortment of new features such as the Party Finder, player commendations, Duty Roulette, and an assortment of fixes and changes that have generally been well received. So how does it all stack up at the end of the day, though, at least in my opinion? Is it really as big of a patch as it's portrayed? Could there have been any improvements? What kind of improvements can they make in future patches? We're going to go over all of that, so don't worry. So let's start with the little things and build our way up to some of the more controversial topics. Now, it seems that most players have accepted the tiny new additions as positive features that will help the game in the long run. There's a lot of little things here, so there's no way I could go over all of them, but let's go over some of the features that may be a little bit less known. The Party Finder gives people a way to make groups within their own server, within their own parameters. Want to chain run a specific dungeon for EXP or loot? Want to run the new content with only well-geared and experienced players? Want to do a practice run on a new boss or work on your relic quest? Party Finder lets anyone who knows about it use it. While this feature is without a doubt perfect for people with specific gaming needs, its biggest flaw is, just as I said, for people who know about it. It was not advertised really at all by the development team. Sure, they mentioned it in the live letters. They said, oh, yeah, we'll have this new feature. But they really never went past that. Even in the patch 2.1 trailer video, they never showed it. They just showed Duty Roulette. So focused on showing everybody all that new content like the Extreme Primals and stuff, the more prominent features, this one really slipped the radar. And that was really the only problem I had with it in patch 2.1. I think going forward, additions like this should trigger new tutorial tips to pop up for players, even players who have turned them off, just to alert them to its presence. Sure, a lot of players ignore those things, but at least have something there to let players know that it exists. Don't expect people to just, oh, let me explore the UI really quickly. Oh, what's the Party Finder? Oh, what is this? I didn't... No. Put something in there that lets people really know about the feature. Those people who may not read the patch notes or even pay attention to certain things in the game. Just put it in there. I think it's the safest way you can do it. Now, for a feature that's definitely seen a lot more light of day than the Party Finder has, the Duty Roulette is one of the more talked about features in 2.1. Not only did it introduce the idea of rewarding people extra gills, seals, EXP for solo queuing into dungeons once per day, but it opened up a new route for leveling new battle classes. I mean, making use of the random bonus once per day can really help players who have little available time to level up, at least at a reasonable pace they can level up using this now. So much so that they don't really feel like they need to play more than the time that they have available. Topped it off with the increased dungeon EXP and the new player commendation edition, which is the ability to allow players to vote on their most impressive player in the dungeon. That just rewards a few vanity gears, some mount, some vanity pets, a title, it's just some things like that. The dungeon grinding experience has been greatly enhanced. Duty Roulette is a big reason for that. Now, while player commendations and Duty Roulette are a start, there are still some issues to be worked out here, such as briefing players who want to watch cutscenes, or maybe just new to a dungeon in general. Sure, you could say they have the Party Finder for the cutscene thing now, but not everybody wants to use the Party Finder. Some people like the implementation of the Duty Finder, so it's just a matter of appealing to as many people as possible. I mean, that vote kick feature definitely felt like it was necessary, but it's definitely hindered some people's playing experiences. I know people who have been booted from Binding Coil runs. They kill the last boss at the end of turn 1, and they get booted from the group by the leader for being the same job as them. I've heard of it happening, and I know people who it has happened to. So sure, you're always going to have abuse with that system, but it would be nice if there was a better way of identifying these kind of things and helping to prevent the players from being griefed. I mean, player commendations was a good step for stuff that you use the Duty Finder for, but along with the addition of the vote kick feature, it just seems like just as many helpful players are popping up as not helpful players. I mean, it's a gamble. It's the gamble you take for using the Duty Roulette. I mean, it's like the Russian roulette of the dungeon experience. If you can get past the occasional griefers, though, I think it's a generally positive implementation into the game. So next, we'll talk about PvP, and this is the only part of the video I think I really haven't made a formal video for yet. And it's definitely more than people expected from a player versus player experience, at least from the Final Fantasy and Square Enix development teams. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's basic. It's your 4 versus 4 arena-style match. They're quick, they're repeatable for hours on end, and that's kind of something that you want in an MMO, in my opinion. You want something that's really short, doesn't take a lot of time out of your day, so everybody can participate in it, but if you want to put the extra time in, you will get something out of it, and it helps for people who want to do something that's a little bit more competitive than player versus environment type content. That being said, this is one aspect of 2.1 that almost feels like it's still in its beta stages. I mean, Final Fantasy has never really been known for its PvP, and I've gone over this a lot of the times in my live streams and my XIV Reborn podcast. We've talked about it a lot. I was optimistic about it, but I wasn't exactly expecting something great and amazing. That being said, you know, the match, it's just got a few issues that definitely need to be buffed out, things that were definitely overlooked. A big one for me, matchmaking balance. It's unfortunately non-existent right now. I mean, with brand new players being thrown in with max rank players in both the solo queue and the group queue, I mean, this can make it really hard, even harder than in most games, for newer players to get interested in PvP, and that's something you kind of want to do when you release a big feature like this. Now, don't get me wrong. Yoshi P and team are hard at working with the balancing issues. I just find it hard to picture overlooking a matchmaking balance in PvP. You always have to consider that there's going to be issues with players who play a lot versus players who are brand new to it. Sure, there's a bit of a way to get around it. There is crafted PvP gear that you can buy before jumping in. Not everybody has money, and in other MMOs, you usually have to PvP like something in more open, like battlegrounds, before you can get the PvP for the arenas. Which I sort of like that. Sure, you can meet that same, you know, player disparity in the battlegrounds. You can still meet it in the arena. But the crafted PvP gear still doesn't hold up to being completely outmatched by players who have, of course, PvP abilities, which is a big, big deal. Sure, in most other MMOs, you can get your you can get some basic PvP gear and then let a little bit of skill determine it. Sure, they might have more, you know, defense than you, or they might have a little bit more offense than you, but at least you're almost on even play. You know, you're at least are on more even playing levels. But with the whole PvP ability thing, it really matters what rank people you are matched up against. If you're rank 1 against a rank 30, they've got all their PvP abilities that they want. They may be respect and figured out which ones they need exactly in order to kill you or to survive the most easily. They've got their PvP, you know, their CC breaking abilities. They've got their extra ability. Like, they just have so much of an advantage more than just gear, which is really why there needs to be some matchmaking balance. And I really hope that they're looking into this more than anything else, really. Sure, there's some bugs like people who jump can sort of bypass location updates to, you know, it can really be annoying for melee players. It doesn't really affect range players, but for melee players, it really, really sucks. So, overall, I feel like they're able to make these, I feel like they should be able to make these changes before 2.2, and I hope they're able to, so players don't feel that intimidated jumping into the fray. Oh, and one last thing that I really want to see is ranked teams. That is one of the most basic features I would want in PvP. So, hopefully by 2.2, if it probably won't be sooner, hopefully in 2.2, if possible. I'd love that. So while we're on the track of less than amazing introductions into the game, let's go into the new feature, housing. Now, this feature was teased for, I don't know exactly how long, but for a really, really long time. And they revealed it to us little by little. It went from just being mentioned to having the housing areas shown to having the houses themselves shown. And the houses themselves are amazing. The degree of customization and creativity housing can invoke in some players is astounding. And I mean, every time I go into the house that, you know, my free company has bought, there's things that are different. I'm like, wow, that's really good. I wish we could keep it that way, but I know people are going to explore and try some new things. Maybe I'll like one better than the other. And it's just amazing to see what some players are capable of in terms of interior design. Even if it's just in this virtual house, there are some amazing jobs that people have done. And not just in my house, but in the people that have bought houses around the game. There's just so much creativity involved in all of this, and you can make it look so nice. The biggest problem with it, and I know you guys saw this one was coming, the price. Now, don't get me wrong, I like the idea of giving free companies a big economical endgame goal in the form of a house. I also enjoy that there's no taxation to retain your property, because that would have sucked. But with the prices in the hundreds of millions of gil, at least on some servers have less, but it's still a lot of money. even in the tens of millions of gil. Most free companies are hard-pressed to participate in this feature, at least for a while. I mean, with the way it's working, house costs will depreciate over time. Plot cost actually will depreciate over time. And in, the next 2-3 months, you'll probably see a lot more houses popping up. And there are plenty of houses to choose from. I think there's 450 plots of land per server right now. I don't know any server that's got 450 different free companies. Almost leads me to believe if individual housing comes out that it will also be in these areas. It was one of the most teased features of 2.1. It was basically the premier feature in 2.1. They would originally talk about small houses being affordable by finishing the story 3 to 4 times and saving all of that money. Sure, that makes it sound like, well, I'm realistically not going to save all that money, so I should probably, get a few extra friends, get a few extra people in this free company. We can work together, we can get the house, and then we can decorate it slowly and over time. Unfortunately, that's not how it ended up playing out at all. So it was almost like, yeah, we want it to be this, but then it ended up being this. I mean, there's not really much you can do about that. Things do change, and, Yoshi P's always been kind of that guy who's like, man, in my perfect world, in this MMO, I want this, I want this, I want this. I know that would just make everybody so happy. And that's like how an MMO player looks at an MMO, and that's what I love about Yoshi P. Unfortunately, his dev team is realistic and like, listen, it's going to take us this long to get this done. This is not working the way, you wanted it done. We're going to have to make some compromises here. And that's sort of what pulls Yoshi P back down, is that he looks at an MMO like an MMO player. And things like this happen because of that, where he's less realistic about what actually has to happen in order for something to be implemented. Does that mean I think that these prices had to be the case? No. But I do see where they're going. They're trying to take some gil out of the economy so that they could probably open up the server transfers to be across all worlds. I think housing was sort of their attempt at that. Don't know that it's working. I don't know if it's really accomplishing that goal on top of just being a long-term goal in general. And he even commented, said, I want this to be a long-term goal for people. And there will be and then if personal housing comes out, it will be far more affordable. So, I mean, hopefully, right now it's even makes less sense because there's no real feature. They are literally just there for vanity. They just look nice. That's what they do. So, hopefully they learned a little bit from the decision with these prices and the outrage that it ended up causing. I'm sure in the coming months, it'll have passed. Some people will still be upset about it, but when the prices have decreased, they're generally more affordable, and anything else they might do with the housing, I think people will be able to overlook this sort of implementation that's sort of awkward. Hey, by the way, this big feature's coming out, but we don't expect you to actually experience it for 3 months. With the promises of things like chocobo, raising, airship building, free company retainers, crafting bonuses, workshops, and things like that, it could be one of the best implementations of housing in years once it becomes more accessible to the, outside world. At least we can hope for affordable personal housing. Okay, now we've been through some of the more depressing stuff, but we're not really done with it. I still have some opinions on some of the other things we're going to talk about. But let's go over some of the PvE content that was added during this patch. People have been enjoying it thus far, at least from what I've seen. So here are my opinions on it. So most important, I think, was the addition of some solo to small group content. I think you definitely need games that have solo to small group content, so there is something there for everybody. And the first one I'm going to talk about is the dailies feature. Now, I'm not a big fan. I expect dailies in MMOs almost. I'm not like, oh my god, they're adding dailies? Oh my god, that's amazing. No, that's like dailies. Saw it coming. It's pretty much expected in most MMOs nowadays. So they cleverly wrapped it, though, in the guise of a Beastmen tribe quests, which is what they were calling it. These quests are available on a daily basis. This is about what you'd expect. I mean, you repeatedly perform quests that become available once per day to gain reputation with a faction. More reputation equals higher ranks, which gives you more rewards from, being with that faction. Each quest also individually rewards money, resources, tomestones, EXP, things like that. They are basically just 6 additional quests everyone can do once per day. They do have a story attached to them, which shows us that not all Beastmen are enemies, which I actually enjoyed that a lot. When I found out that the Beastmen quests actually were given to us by Beastmen, I was very pleasantly surprised. Dailies with a good story is a plus, but I won't sit here and tell you that all is well. I mean, they are dailies, plain and simple. A wider variety of dailies might help break up the monotony of doing the same quests every day. Hopefully they can find more interesting ways to implement that in 2.2 when the Cobalt and the Saka are brought into fray, but expectations are not high on dailies. They're dailies, you sort of just expect them to be dailies, maybe with a nice story wrapped around behind them, and that's all that I really need, just to be content with dailies. Now, on the other hand, treasure hunts are an addition to the game I welcome with open arms. They encourage the use of gatherers, which some people were concerned about, and treasure hunts offer players an opportunity to uncover rare items alone, or they can do it with a few friends. Some of them you have to bring a few friends. You get rare minions, crafting materials, even some gear upgrades if you're doing some of the low-level ones on your newer classes. Do the level 40 treasure hunts, maybe get a new headpiece or something like that, those ethereal grade loots that you can get. On top of gil and shards, I mean, sign me up. The battles are easy, they're appealing, it's pretty much content for everybody. You can either do the solo ones or you can do the group ones, and you will feel rewarded either way. Now, the only downside so far is that you can only gather a map every 18 hours. Yourself, you can only gather one. You can go buy as many maps as you want and do as many maps as you want, as long as you aren't the one trying to gather it yourself, is the best way I can think to describe it. It helps ensure that players with little available time can still participate fairly, at least on a semi-daily basis. It also prevents the contents of the hunts from overrunning the market. Sort of. The rare materials you don't see that much of on the market, and that's okay. The common materials, however, have caused some problems for the markets. I mean, elemental shards and even HQ crafting materials like rose gold nuggets, HQ. They're so much more common now because of the treasure hunts, and it's making markets that were once semi-viable a lot harder to get into just through crafting alone. Sure, it's nice. You do the treasure hunt, and you get this, and you sell it. It's nice. But for the people who leveled their crafters with the expectation of participating in a market, it's really bringing those markets down. So I don't want to say they need to tone back the rewards, but they need to redirect them and make sure that they don't influence markets that were otherwise doing good enough for people to make money on a daily basis. I mean, sure, shards, go ahead and reward them. They reward a few hundred, though, which seems a bit excessive considering how many people are doing maps a day. It can add up pretty quickly if you actually, do them with 8 people over and over again, and that one person gets lucky. The reward system's a little bit biased, too. The common rewards being thrown to random people despite who used the map. A little bit odd if you're doing it with a party, that is. I would just like to see them less influence other markets. Even back in Final Fantasy XI, I was a chocobo digger. Chocobo digging, when I did it, was a very, very niche market. I mean, you could get some rewards that affected other markets, but they were so rare in both markets that neither was affected. Unfortunately, in this, they're very common, and they're very common in the other one, so it just crashes the market. And I really think they need to be more careful about implementing things like this that give out these kind of rewards. That is my opinion on the treasure hunt so far. Alright, now that the solo stuff is out of the way, let's move into some group content, because this is where it gets significantly better. The first thing we should probably talk about are the 2 new hard mode dungeons. These revamped dungeons have been causing people a lot of trouble in the duty finder from what I can see. They've got unique mechanics and strict checks on DPS, healing, and in some cases tanking. Generally, they're considered to be good challenges that deserve the title hard mode, which is something that's, hard mode, heroic, whatever you want to call it, is sort of been frowned upon in the recent years of MMO gaming. Hawk Banner and Copperball Mines were the first to receive this treatment, and they are certainly not the last. Now, they do boast a decent challenge for fresh 50s, as I said. I was a little bit disappointed at the implementation. I mean, the idea of hard mode dungeons was originally revealed to the public a long time ago, and a few things were mentioned. The big details were that they were going to not be the same dungeon and enemies, just with higher levels. Like when you go into a hard mode dungeon, and it's literally the exact same enemies, exact same bosses, maybe a new mechanic thrown in, but generally, things just hit harder. They wanted to avoid that, and I think they accomplished that very, very well. I mean, they said they would have new bosses, different mechanics, and a different atmosphere. They also spoke about going down different paths and making sure that the dungeon didn't look the same. And to that, they don't look the same. When you're in a hard mode Copperbell, a hard mode Hawk, you can see what's different. You can feel the atmosphere, and it's different, and it's good. They boasted a lot of these things. Still, I was a little bit disappointed, mostly in Copperbell, when we were traveling along a lot of the same paths to go down the same areas. It didn't make a lot of sense to me. Sure, you can get away with the idea that Copperball mines are mines, and that, you have cave-ins and things like that can close previous paths, and then make you have to do them again. But it also opens the perfect opportunity to take different paths. Hawk Banner didn't really surprise me that much. I mean, it's a house. It is. It's not like the house could have vastly changed with shit going upside down and things like that. It's just, it can't happen like that. But Copperbell Mines, I was a little bit disappointed. I was hoping to see a lot more paths open up and be used. I mean, some were, but generally I was expecting more from the layout. Hell, even for Hawk Manor, you know, I'm just going to say it would have been nice if the front yard was just included as part of the instance dungeon. I don't know. I just feel like it could have opened up, you know, going outside of the manor as part of the dungeon, and it would have been a lot nicer. Hopefully they can do things like that with other sort of enclosed castle and manor type dungeons in the future, that they don't feel like they need to all be contained to the inside of the actual structure. I think that generally that's a good thing. I think Brayflox is a perfect example of ways they could do that. So anyway, moving on from the hard mode dungeons, we do have a brand new dungeon that did come out called Pharos Sirius. It's another brand new 4-man dungeon. It was released this patch, and it mostly follows the same guidelines as the hard modes. But I think it boasts a lot more than the hard modes did. It's got some brand new enemy types, which I always welcome. It's got some awesome music. It's got crazy environments, and it's got interesting bosses all packed into one. And considering it's just a regular dungeon, I am not going to complain about that at all. It was basically everything I hoped it would be from a new dungeon. Basically met expectations. The music exceeded expectations, but the rest of the dungeon met expectations. But that's not to say I didn't have a few issues with it. My biggest one is like not even the dungeon itself, it's the music. That amazing music resonates through all of Pharos Sirius as you progress upwards, and then it gets replaced by generic music. I would just have loved to either have a unique boss theme just to that dungeon, maybe even intensify the music when you're fighting the boss, but I really didn't want that music to be replaced when I got to the final boss or even during regular boss encounters. I just wanted it to play the entire time. It almost seems like the introduction to the... this is another problem I have. It almost seems like the introduction to the dungeon was far more difficult than the conclusion, with the first two bosses posing a generally higher challenge than the last two. It just seemed a bit inconsistent to me. The last boss can be a problem if you have a melee-heavy group, and even for new groups, Siren is still a hard boss, don't get me wrong. She has a lot of mechanics, but a lot of them can be stunned, they can be completely avoided, and it's generally just, you know, at worst, Asuna something off somebody. It doesn't really get any worse than that. So, I just wish there had been more consistency going up through the dungeon. And the third boss, don't even get me started on the third boss. I thought that was a trash pull. I was like, what? I get loot and philosophy for this? Okay, I'll take it. But generally, the first two bosses are harder regardless of what kind of group composition you have. Especially if you're learning the dungeon for the first time. The second boss can be brutal for you. Overall, I liked Pharos Sirius, but I want that damn music all the time. Now, moving up the ladder, we come to the Crystal Tower, and this tower has really hit it home with the idea of casual raiding. You queue up with 16 to 23 random other players to raid through some common enemies and 4 moderately designed bosses, though they tune them to an item level that was far lower than most people have in the game already. 1 piece of loot is rewarded per alliance per boss, so you get 12 pieces of loot total, 4 pieces per 8 people. It rewards several hundred philosophy tomestones and 50 mythology tomestones, so it really helps players gearing up in as many different ways as possible. You can get the gear from the bosses, you can get philosophy gear, and you can get mythology gear. Just, it's all good. It's tons of different ways to progress your character. But, that being said, the Crystal Tower has faced some criticism, and I'm going to give it some criticism as well. Most of this stuff you've probably heard before, so this is just my take on it. First on the list is the ability to only get 1 piece of loot per week from the Crystal Tower. Only 1. Now, I have seen the positives of this. The positive is that people won't simply overfarm the tower in the first couple of weeks and never touch it again. It keeps the content lasting. Sure, you can, but then you can also look at it as it invites players to just leave or even troll if they either win or lose that 1 piece of gear. If they don't have anything to lose for the week, they can just go. There's a lot of trolls and a lot of griefers in the Crystal Tower. Sure, it's also because it's a bigger dungeon, you're more likely to run into those people. But it would have been nice to have some sort of countermeasures to these kind of things. And that 1 piece of loot definitely causes as many problems as it does solve. So, I mean, it's a double-edged sword. You either make it so you don't have 1 piece of loot lockout. Maybe even 2 pieces of loot lockout would have been nice. I think 2 pieces of loot lockout definitely could have prolonged the experience while still restricting trolls and griefers a little bit more. But generally, trolls don't always ruin the dungeon experience. They make things more difficult. Unless that troll is a really well-geared tank. That can definitely cause some issues. It also faced some criticism for being too easy, and just being content that was released at an odd time in general. I mean, it is true. The Crystal Tower was released at such a time when people already have gear from the Binding Coil of Bahamut. At least some people do. Or at least have had time to get mythology gear from the past, 12, 13, 14 weeks, however long the game was released before we had patch 2.1. And it's nice for gearing out alternative jobs, basically. I actually like that by design. It's nice to know I don't have to spend my mythology or get lucky on some binding coil drops to upgrade my gear sets for the jobs that I play more casually. Sure, those will still be the best pieces, the mythology and the coil pieces, but I can use the CT gear to hold me over, at least until I'm lucky enough to get a drop on the coil, and I can save the mythology tomestones for more important jobs. Some people are going to dislike it, and I don't blame them. I mean, I approve of this sort of mid-tier content in this sort of implementation. I really think this sort of implementation only works with a game like 14, though, where you can play everything on a single character. Any other model where you can only play like one job per character, one class per character, I think this sort of implementation would have completely flopped if it had been in that degree. It can be a little bit frustrating not getting the gear, only because sometimes you'll roll on one piece only to hit another, only to before the end of the dungeon find another piece that you would have rolled on. But that's what next week is for, I guess. And next on the Crystal Tower, and this is a big one, the queue. While it is called a 24-man raid, you can't actually make a 24-man pre-made to queue up for it. Well, you can do it normally. I mean, you can work around it by queuing up with 3 different parties at the exact same time and try to identify if you're all in the same queue. However, there's no built-in system, and it's likely only attributed to the fact that only the code for the Crystal Tower has the alliance system within it, meaning that it was designed to only function in the Crystal Tower. So I think they're still trying to work out how to implement it into the open world without throwing off the balance, but honestly, I don't think the content in the open world is really going to have its balance affected. It's balanced around solo play for the most part. So what does it matter if 24 people get together if 1 to 4 people could already beat most everything in the open world? I mean, obviously Odin and Behemoth are different, but unless it's going to impact some sort of content they had planned for later, they need to just find a way to get that code implemented into the open world so we can get that 24-man queue system working. I'm sure also the Duty Finder itself doesn't support the 24-man queue feature, and I think that's really where the problem lies. So hopefully they can find ways to implement those without doing too much server stress or people abusing it to some degree. And the only other complaint I have about the Crystal Tower is the unlocking process. Now, it contains a series of quests, one of which is gated by 4 fates that are not soloable. Now, some of you may recall I used to support the idea of linking quests to fates. I thought it was a unique implementation that might give some of the lower level fates more, you know, sort of like what they did with the main story, which we'll talk about later, where they can sort of attach lower level fates to these quests. And I completely take that back because this implementation turned it around for me when I didn't do it on day 1 like everyone else. It makes it a piece of content that can be difficult to get into for players down the road. Especially think about when later floors are released and newer players are trying to catch up. Not only do they need to unlock it, but there's also the hint they probably need to beat Labyrinth of the Ancients as well. It's going to cause some problems for people down the road, but I guess we'll have to cross that road when we get to it. We'll see where it goes, but I don't like this whole quest to fate system going forward. It just alienates people who get into the game later, and I really believe that they should do their best to avoid that. So overall, the Crystal Tower itself is a good casual raid. Just looking at the content inside is a good casual raid. I think if it was tuned to some higher item levels, it might have actually been a moderate difficulty raid. Nothing too fancy, and probably wouldn't have wanted to Duty Finder it at that point. But for now, it's a good start. I hope they learn from some of their mistakes here. And in my opinion, I think we'll be a lot happier with the next tier of the Crystal Tower raids. Alright, now let's talk about some 8-man content, and what better way to start than with the Good King himself, Good King Moggle Mog the 12th. He's making his debut here in A Realm Reborn. He was available back in 2.0, but this is his return. This is his debut for the patch 2.0 and on. He's a returning antagonist that is so cute that he'll kill you with awes and laughter. Basically, every word they say, every motion they do will probably distract you so much to the point where you'll probably die if you don't keep a clear head. It's a fun and hectic fight, and the Good King took one of Final Fantasy's most popular mascots and turned them into a deadly army of fluffy Moogles. The fight itself isn't that difficult, but it's got a lot going on. It's fun to do and it's fun to watch. So it's also got the best music in the game. Remember when I said how much I liked Pharos Sirius because of the music, and that I was so sad when the music didn't play the whole dungeon? They do it right here, and that song not only plays throughout the whole dungeon, but it's part of the fight mechanics. The second phase of the fight triggers at a certain point in the song, and then the song gets even better. So that's a perfect implementation of the music, at least. You know, the only real problem, it's another piece of mid-tier content. Now, Mid-tier content is fine for me. As I just said, I thought the Crystal Tower was a good implementation of mid-tier content, offering people opportunities to gear out other jobs with, you know, armor pieces and things like that. This one is in a much more awkward spot. This one's meant to help people prepare for Titan hard mode with item level 75 weapons. It's generally optional, other than it has some influence in the main story. Most people will still go right from Garuda to Titan, though. People aren't going to stop to farm their Moggle weapon, and that's my only real problem with it. It doesn't seem to appeal to a wide crowd. You don't often see Thorn March parties forming, oh, we're going to farm Moggle weapons. You don't see that often, and it's one of the longest queue times in the game. Even as a tank or a healer, I've had to sit in that queue for well over 30 minutes, which you just don't see for most of other content. This is an example of group-based story content coming at the wrong time. In the future, I'd like to see more enticing rewards coming from story-related battles. Something to get people repeating them. Not so much to the degree that we have more Praetorium and Castrum speedruns, but something else. Perhaps a Moggle mount would do? Maybe? We'll think about it later. Let's move on. Now, Ultima's Ballad, on the other hand, is an example of a fight that's perfect in its implementation. Unlike Moggle, it takes about 5 minutes to unlock, and its rewards are much better side grades. They're useful, unlike Moggle's weapon upgrade, which is generally not considered as useful. I mean, Ultima's Ballad is quick to unlock rematch of Ultima Weapon, for those of you who don't know. And not only is he a decent challenge, but he's a fun encounter, and he has epic music. Again, with the music, I can't stop. Not to mention the rewards are varied enough to make people want to farm him. Item level 80 accessories are far more tantalizing than item level 70 weapons, considering item level 80 accessories didn't exist in the game before, so people didn't have that option, which is really why I liked Ultima's implementation better than Moggle's. I hope to see side grades introduced in the form of accessories and armor more often, like Crystal Tower and Ultima have shown. They are far more sought after than weapon side grades. Going from 70 to 75 to 80 doesn't entice people as much as these straight from 70 to 80 or straight from 80 to 90 type upgrades that you can get. My other favorite part was how they implemented Ultima, who they used, the Wandering Minstrel. He sings tales of epic stories, and he makes them even more epic. You use this as a tool to access harder versions of fights where main scenario characters might have been completely killed off. This offers up a lot of potential for rematches and whole new bosses to be implemented. Maybe the Wandering Minstrel's like, I remember before I even came to Eorzea, I fought this guy. Would you like me to tell you the story about it? Bam! You've got a whole new boss fight that's just walk into it and do it, and it's epic. I really, really like the direction that they're going with the Wandering Minstrel, and I'm excited to see the future of the Wandering Minstrel. And finally, this brings us to the hardest piece of group content in patch 2.1, Extreme Mode Primals. Now, in 1.0, one of the hardest encounters in the game was Ifrit Extreme. So it's no surprise to see people are excited for Garuda and Titan Extreme as well. And generally, these fights do not disappoint. While the bosses use a lot of the same tricks, they are either amplified in different ways while bringing some new elements into the fight as well. This makes the encounters feel fresh while retaining the same aesthetics, really. I do feel that some bosses saw a bit more innovation than the other ones. I know, to me, if you've watched my Extreme Mode guides, Ifrit felt the least innovative to me, while Garuda felt definitely the most renewed of the three fights. I was most impressed with Garuda's fight. Titan fell somewhere in the middle for me. He had some modified mechanics, and he has some new friends to help him out. But generally, it's still the same type of fight for Titan. It's still, you know, don't get hit by way to land, don't get hit by the bomb patterns, learn the bomb patterns, don't get hit by landslide, break people out of jails. All those features were just amplified in several folds. Sure, there was some new features and some new rotations to his abilities, but I was not that impressed with Titan's new fight. Overall, I was impressed with the individual encounters, but these encounters would have been far more impressive if they had come out when we were still gearing up for them, when we were still in the process of gearing up for Coil. Now, unfortunately, I think that just would have made them so much less accessible at the time, and what I love about these is that people are having fun jumping in. People, oh man, I'm still doing Coil, I can't be turn 5, let me do Extreme Mode Primals. I liked that. I liked that level of implementation. Sure, you could have had that with the implementation in 2.0, but they would have almost looked like another stepping stone before you even go into the Binding Coil. It's like, oh, you can't beat it for Extreme, don't do that. And these things are rated on the difficulty of somewhere just before turn 5, so it definitely would have been really interesting to see how this fight is done. I mean, an average item level 70 for Ifrit, I'm sure somebody out there wants to try it, and I kind of want to try it out too. So if you're thinking about it, yeah, we should work on that. Oh, remember when I said Ultima did side grades right? Well, the Primals took it a step further. Each Primal offers a different type of accessory. Earrings, rings, wrists. So it's earrings for Titan, wrists for Ifrit, and a ring for Garuda. So this not only meshes with them all individually, making each Primal sort of sought out for their own reason, but Ultima additionally filled the other 2 slots with item level 80 stuff, the neck and the second ring slot. So it all seems really well thought out. Primals also have a chance at dropping a mount, the Nightmare, which is always welcome for me too. I love rare mounts that drop in dungeons and endgame raid fights. I think it's a great incentive to do it. Sometimes it causes a little bit of drama, and I think any MMO player who's played an MMO where mounts drop in raids know that that can cause a lot of drama. But it's pixels as far as I'm concerned, so it doesn't cause drama for me. And finally, you have housing items and an item level 90 weapon at the end of it. It's basically one of the most rewarding series of fights in the game. The weapons are side grades, but unlike Moggle Mogs, they offer a real option to the player. Players can deck out most of their jobs in item level 90 weapons before 2.2 without spending all those mythology points. And you can even offer people... They even offer people stuff that don't have upgraded relics. As opposed to spending the 900 mytho on their upgraded relic, they can just try and get the extreme primal weapon. Not always easy to do. Definitely easier said than done, but it's an option. So overall, the EX Primals were one of my favorite additions. They showed off renewed mechanics, some entirely new ones, and are extremely rewarding in all senses. I mean, let's go over it. New mount, housing items, accessories, side grades, and upgrades, and brand new weapons. I approve of all of this. I guess the only other real aspects I should speak on quickly are some of the new story elements that were brought in 2.1. The new main scenario quests, they weren't that much. They didn't do that much for me. At first, they seemed really cool. I enjoyed, sending people to do, seeing people do the mid-level content to progress forward. But after the first few initial cutscenes where they sort of laid the foundation for what you were trying to accomplish in patch 2.1 in the main scenario, it just turned into a lot of bring us stuff quests, pretty much. Just, hey, yeah, go bring that so we can do this. And sure, I wasn't expecting a high amount of quest variety, but the story almost like, it was like that was it. You knew the story, now go get it done, and that was the whole thing. There was no, there was very little development. There was some character development. There definitely was one big aspect of character development that I really enjoyed. Something that I didn't expect to see, which was really nice. And it also left us with a really nice cliffhanger, something that's definitely got me interested for 2.2's main story. So, overall, I'd give it, it's about 50-50 for me. Maybe 75-25, because I don't want to give it a failing score of a 50. The Crystal Tower, on the other hand, I felt was short enough. It had a good story going into it, and had a good cliffhanger coming out of it. In my theory, the ending has a lot of theories going on about what's going on in the Crystal Tower, and I like things that invoke thought process like that. I don't want to spoil it. I'm going to talk about that more in another lore video, but definitely make sure you watch those cutscenes for the Crystal Tower. They are really good. And what I like, it wasn't as drawn out. It was a short quest line, and I still don't like the whole quest of the whole fate quest thing, but generally it was very short, which made it very easy to keep all of the elements and develop the characters quickly enough, which I very, very much enjoyed. And then, of course, we have Hildebrand. I think Hildebrand will go down as one of Final Fantasy's greatest characters, and his first introduction into A Realm Reborn attests to that. Not only that, but the inclusion of a certain classic Final Fantasy character helps propel this questline to an A+ rating from me. I will admit, I don't enjoy the whole Fate questing thing here, but the story was so damn good, and the Fates are easier to solo, so it's not as bad as the Crystal Tower ones. Of course, there were tons of little tweaks, some class balancing, some UI changes. Overall, though, 2.1 felt like a good direction for Final Fantasy XIV, since it's an MMO that has faced incredibly hard times over the past 3 years. There are some major hiccups that still need to be addressed, but there's one thing that bothered me, and I want to pick everyone's brain on this. I want everyone's opinion on this in the comments below. Would you have minded waiting longer for the game to release to have all this sort of side content introduced with the launch so that it made more sense? Not like, oh, I already have all item level 90. Why am I going to go back and do this stuff? So you could sort of eliminate that, but still offer the same amount of options for players. A game would have launched just in time for the holiday season if it were to launch on December 17th. In my opinion, was a perfect time to launch, as opposed to August 27th, when a lot of people were, a lot of the high school students and college students going back to school, and they don't have as much time to play, and they're less interested in a big long-term purchase like that. I don't know. Or are you actually, or how about this? Because I also played the other side of it. Are you happy that they let 2.0 launch, fixed most of the server stability issues, and are now introducing content at a steady rate? I mean, don't get me wrong, it's an odd update. It contains mostly vanity and side content as opposed to vertical content. I'm personally glad they took the 4 months, though. Sure, I think it makes more sense looking at the individual content pieces that they should have just waited. But in all realism, if they had just waited 4 months to release the game, put all this extra content in, but they didn't know they would have needed, you know, all those additional data centers, all of the additional tweaks that they've made. Certain boss fights would still be broken. They wouldn't have had the experience coming into 2.1 probably to make these fights as good as they are. I think it's a good move that they waited the extra 4 months to make the improvements that they did before releasing the newer content. I don't think releasing it all at once would have. I think it would have been even worse in all reality. I mean, some of this stuff would have been nightmarish to deal with when the game first launched, and this patch definitely went a lot smoother in its implementation. I almost looked at it as a learning experience for the developers, and I can honestly say they learned well. It gives me hope for the game in the future as they perform fixes and updates that will hopefully keep this game in the MMO scene for a pretty long time. I know I'll be sticking to it. Oh my god, it's been 41 minutes. Alright guys, sorry for the long video. I'll definitely be sure to add little clips in the description below so you can know at what times I'm talking about what. Anyway guys, thanks for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like, favorite, subscribe, and share for more Final Fantasy XIV information, videos, guides. Check out the rest of my channel for some of the other stuff I post, some Final Fantasy walkthroughs, some Diablo 3 videos I got posted. Definitely going to be posting a lot of new stuff now that it's the year of 2014. Also, be sure to follow me on Facebook and Twitter. You get regular updates about what I'm doing. You can ask me questions, whatever you really want to use it for. And, of course, you can follow me on Twitch where I do stream Final Fantasy XIV, some other Final Fantasy games. We'll be streaming a lot of different things in the year of 2014. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching. Hope you had a happy new year. And until next time, take care.